Enjoy starving on that cheap public beach, Vivian. The local police said they cannot verify your identity, so you are stuck there for at least a week. Do not expect anyone here to pay for your ticket home. Your father says failures need to learn how to survive on their own. We are flying back to Atlanta in style. Good luck finding a meal tonight. That was the text message my arrogant brother-in-law, Preston, sent me from the first-class cabin of a transatlantic flight. He had attached a photo of himself and my sister Giselle clinking crystal champagne flutes, their faces glowing with the smug satisfaction of a family that believed they had just pulled off the perfect crime. They had secretly rummaged through my luggage, stolen my only personal passport, and abandoned me on a small, remote island in the Maldives. They had meticulously calculated flight times and international bureaucratic delays, absolutely certain that without a passport, an emergency replacement would take at least 3 days to process. They wanted me stuck in the middle of the Indian Ocean, hopelessly stranded, terrified, and entirely dependent on their non-existent mercy. They were celebrating, they were toasting to my demise, they believed they had finally erased me, securing a $50 million inheritance that legally belonged to me. But there was one catastrophic flaw in their brilliant, villainous master plan. They had no idea that I was not sitting on a white sand beach crying over my lost passport. I was sitting exactly 2 terminals away from their arrival gate at the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, holding a fully encrypted hard drive containing every single fraudulent financial record they had ever desperately tried to hide. Let me know in the comments where you are watching this from today, because I can guarantee you have never witnessed a family destruction quite as absolute and devastating as the one I am about to tell you. My name is Vivian. For the past 12 years I have built a quiet, terrifying reputation as a senior forensic auditor and corporate liquidator. My entire career, my entire life's purpose, revolves around breaking through heavy encryption, tracking hidden offshore accounts, and systematically dismantling massively corrupt financial empires. Billionaires hire me to find the money their business partners steal. Federal agencies consult my firm when the paper trail goes cold. I am the ghost in the machine. I am the woman who finds the hidden ledgers, the secret shell companies, and the buried lies. And the most ironic, deeply satisfying part of my entire existence is that the very family that threw me away like garbage was the family whose financial empire I was about to completely and utterly liquidate. They were a flawlessly coordinated crime syndicate hiding behind stained glass windows, gospel choirs, and the protective shield of immense wealth. So when Corinne had suddenly called me 3 weeks ago, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, begging me to join the family on a luxury vacation to the Maldives, every single instinct in my body screamed that it was a trap. She had spun a tearful narrative about getting older, about realizing the mistakes of the past, about desperately wanting to heal our fractured family before it was too late. She had cried on the phone, claiming Reginald had a change of heart, that he wanted to formally apologize for the misunderstandings of my youth. I knew they were lying. The Wilsons did not apologize, they only manipulated. But my professional curiosity, the deeply ingrained instinct of an auditor sensing a massive discrepancy, forced me to accept the invitation. I needed to know why, after 18 years of total radio silence, they were suddenly so desperate to have me in the same room. I needed to know what they were hiding. The trip to the Maldives was an excruciating, carefully choreographed nightmare of passive-aggressive hostility and fake smiles. We stayed in an obscenely expensive private overwater villa, surrounded by crystal-clear turquoise waters and pristine white sand. The entire setting was designed to look like a tropical paradise, but the atmosphere inside the villa was utterly toxic. I played my part perfectly. I did not argue, I did not rise to their bait, I simply sat there, observing, cataloging every micro-expression, every whispered conversation, and every sudden shift in their demeanor. I was a predator studying its prey, waiting for them to make their move. The move happened on the morning of my 32nd birthday. I woke up early, the tropical sun streaming through the sheer curtains of my bedroom. The villa was completely silent, unnaturally silent. I walked out into the massive living area, expecting to find the private chef preparing breakfast or Corinne lounging on the deck with her green juice. Instead, the villa was entirely empty. All of their Louis Vuitton luggage was gone, the coffee table was cleared, the sliding glass doors were locked from the inside. A cold, clinical clarity washed over me. I walked straight to the small electronic safe hidden in the closet of my room. I punched in my temporary code, the heavy metal door popped open, the safe was empty. My personal passport, the one I had used to check into the resort, The one Corinne had insisted on holding onto for safekeeping when we arrived, was gone. My emergency cash was gone. They had stripped me of my identification and vanished into thin air. I did not panic. Panic is an emotion reserved for the unprepared. I simply walked over to the nightstand, picked up my encrypted corporate phone and saw the text message from Preston glowing on the screen. "Enjoy starving on that cheap public beach, Vivian." I read the text twice. I noted the timestamp. They had checked out at 3 in the morning, taking a private boat to the main island to catch the earliest flight back to the United States. They had left me stranded on a private resort island that required documentation to leave, with no cash, no passport, and no way to prove my identity to the local authorities. Why? Why go through the immense expense and logistical nightmare of dragging me across the globe just to abandon me on my 32nd birthday? The answer arrived precisely 3 minutes later, in the form of a frantic, highly secure email from a man named Attorney Arthur Harrison. The subject line was flagged with extreme urgency: immediate action, recoil, trust fund breach. I opened the email. The first sentence hit me with the force of a freight train. "Vivian, you must return to United States soil by midnight tonight, or you will forfeit the $50 million trust your grandfather left entirely in your name." $50 million, my breath caught in my throat. I sat down heavily on the edge of the perfectly made bed, staring at the glowing screen. My late grandfather, a stern, incredibly wealthy industrialist who had always seen right through Reginald's holy facade, had left me a fortune, but knowing my parents' relentless greed, he had structured the trust with an ironclad, incredibly specific stipulation. The trust remained locked, generating massive interest for 18 years until the exact day of my 32nd birthday. On that specific day and that day only, I had to physically present myself to the trustees on American soil to claim the principal $50 million. If I failed to appear by midnight, the entire sum defaulted immediately to the secondary beneficiary. The secondary beneficiary was Giselle. The sheer scale of the manipulation was breathtaking. It was a masterpiece of sociopathic planning. Every fake smile, every tearful apology from Corinne, every expensive dinner on the beach, it was all a calculated performance to lure me out of the country. They needed me trapped overseas, unable to board a flight, unable to reach the trustees, until the clock struck midnight. They had smiled in my face while actively plotting to steal my future, leaving me to rot thousands of miles from home while they flew back to claim a fortune that wasn't theirs. A low, dark chuckle escaped my lips. The sound echoed in the empty luxury villa. It was the sound of a woman who had just been handed the exact weapon she needed to destroy the people who had terrorized her. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought I was the same helpless, terrified little girl they had thrown into the freezing snow all those years ago. They had made a fatal miscalculation. I walked over to the false bottom of my leather laptop bag. I unzipped the hidden compartment and pulled out my secondary, highly classified corporate passport. As a senior forensic auditor who frequently dealt with hostile corporate takeovers and dangerous international liquidations, I never traveled anywhere without redundant identification, encrypted communication devices, and untraceable emergency funds. They had stolen my personal passport, completely oblivious to the fact that I held diplomatic-level clearance documents secured by my firm. I didn't call the resort staff, I didn't beg for help. I packed my bag, booked a direct, high-speed charter flight on my corporate account, and left the island exactly 2 hours after I woke up. I flew straight into the heart of the storm, beating their massive commercial flight back to Atlanta by a full 12 hours. Which brought me to this exact moment, sitting in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the Atlanta airport medical room, watching Attorney Harrison spread the final pieces of the puzzle across a metal examination table. "Look at page 4, Harrison said, his voice grim, his face pale with exhaustion. He had intercepted me the moment I landed, pulling me into the secure medical room to brief me on the full extent of the nightmare. He pushed a thick stack of banking records directly onto my lap. "Your family did not invite you to the Maldives to heal old wounds. They invited you there to erase you." I looked down at the heavy file. My professional training immediately took over, overriding any lingering emotional shock. The numbers stared back at me, columns of offshore transfers, complex wire routing codes, and aggressive investment yields, all linking back to Reginald's massive real estate empire. I turned to page 4. It was a police report. It was stamped and certified by the Fulton County Sheriff's Department, dated exactly 19 years ago. It stated that I had run away from home at the age of 13. It declared me a missing, endangered runaway minor. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the police report. It belonged to my mother, Corinne, the woman who had handed me a mimosa on the beach 48 hours ago. The woman who had sworn she loved me. They filed this false report the day after they kicked you out. Harrison explained, his voice low and tight with anger. Reginald and Corinne declared you a runaway so they could assume emergency guardianship over the trust interest. Your grandfather bypassed them, but the law allowed them to control the interest generated by your trust until you were found or came of age. The memory of being 13 years old hit me like a physical blow. The cold, the snow, the absolute soul-crushing betrayal. They have been siphoning the interest for 18 years. Harrison continued, tapping a highlighted column of numbers. Millions of dollars. They used it to fund the church. They used it to build his real estate empire. They used your stolen identity as collateral for every massive loan they ever took out. But they couldn't touch the principal, 50 million. Not until tonight. If you are not sitting in my office by midnight, the money transfers to Giselle, and Preston will wire it into their joint accounts instantly. They hadn't just abandoned me, they had built their entire kingdom on my back. Every brick of their megachurch, every designer suit, every luxurious vacation was paid for with the blood money stolen from a 13-year-old girl freezing in the snow. We need to leave for my office immediately, Vivian, Harrison said, reaching for my arm. We have to secure the trust before Reginald lands. We have 7 hours. I pulled my arm back. The dizzy feeling that had briefly washed over me was completely gone. The scared child shivering in the dark was dead. I looked at the bank records one more time. I saw the fragile, corrupt house of cards Reginald had built using my stolen identity. And I saw exactly, mathematically, how to dismantle it. We are not going to your office, Harris, I said, my voice dangerously calm, vibrating with a cold, terrifying fury. I unzipped my laptop bag. Where are we going then? Harrison asked, looking deeply confused. To the international arrival gate, I replied, powering up my decryption software. My family lands in exactly 15 minutes, and I am going to give them the exact welcome home they truly deserve. The harsh, sterile glow of the laptop screen illuminated the dark, unhealed corners of my memory. As the decryption software chewed through the firewall of my father's megachurch servers, I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. I was no longer a 32-year-old corporate liquidator sitting in a high-security airport medical room. I was 13 years old again. I could feel it, the biting, merciless winter wind slicing straight through my thin cotton pajamas. I could feel the agonizing sting of the frozen concrete of our massive circular driveway against my bare feet. I could taste the metallic tang of blood in my mouth where I had bitten my lip to keep from crying out. It was December 19th, exactly 19 years ago. The exact day my childhood ended and the exact day their fraudulent empire truly began. The events of that night were burned into my cerebral cortex with eidetic precision. It hadn't started with a massive rebellion or a dramatic criminal act. It had started with a simple, terrifying observation. I had been sitting in my father's home office, a cavernous room lined with mahogany bookshelves and expensive oil paintings, looking for a stapler for a school project. I had accidentally bumped his massive oak desk and a ledger had fallen open. Like a naive, foolish child who still believed in the concept of truth, I confronted him. I walked into the grand dining room where Reginald was having a late dinner and asked him why church money was paying for Giselle's car. The reaction was instantaneous, violent, and utterly devoid of parental affection. Reginald did not explain, he did not rationalize, he simply erupted. The holy, charismatic bishop vanished, replaced by a ruthless, terrifying narcissist who had just been challenged by a child he already despised. He grabbed me by the collar of my pajamas. His grip was tight, restrictive, designed to cause maximum fear. I remembered his tailored wool suit brushing against my arm. I remembered the heavy gold watch on his wrist bought with congregation money catching the light of the crystal chandelier as he dragged me through the grand foyer of our luxury estate. He didn't say a word as he hauled me toward the massive oak front door. He just breathed heavily, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He threw me out onto the porch. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and my knees scraped against the freezing stone. "You are a worthless piece of trash," Reginald roared, his voice booming over the howling winter wind. He stood in the doorway, a towering silhouette of absolute authority, looking down at me as if I were an infectious disease. "You are a stain on this family. You are a rebellious, ungrateful demon, and you do not fit the pristine image of my congregation. I will not allow your poison to ruin my pastoral brand." I shivered uncontrollably, the snow rapidly accumulating on my shoulders. I looked past his massive frame, desperately seeking the one person who was supposed to protect me. My mother, Corinne, stood right behind him. She wore a luxurious silk robe, the fabric shimmering in the warm, golden light spilling from the foyer. She was holding a ceramic mug of hot tea. I could see the steam rising from the cup. I begged her. I pleaded with her, my voice cracking, tears streaming down my face, freezing almost instantly on my cheeks. I told her my feet were going numb. I told her I was sorry. I told her I would never ask questions again. Corinne didn't blink, she didn't flinch, she simply took a slow, elegant sip of her hot tea, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped tightly around the mug. She looked at me with a cold, dead expression, entirely devoid of empathy or maternal instinct. "Close it, Reginald," she said softly. "The draft is ruining the temperature in the house." Reginald smirked. He looked at me one last time, a look of pure, triumphant malice, and slammed the heavy oak door shut. I heard the deadbolt click into place. I heard the secondary security chain slide across the metal track. They locked me out in the middle of a blizzard in thin cotton pajamas. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, pounding my small freezing fists against the immovable oak door. I screamed until my throat was raw. I looked up at the second-story window and saw Giselle standing there, wrapped in a thick down comforter, looking down at me. She didn't look horrified, she looked bored. She simply closed the velvet curtains, shutting me out entirely. When the realization finally hit me, the absolute crushing reality that they were never going to open that door, that they actively wanted me to freeze to death to protect their secrets, something inside me snapped. The terrified, desperately hopeful 13-year-old girl died on that porch. The tears froze, and I vowed in the absolute depths of my soul that I would never shed another tear for the Wilson family as long as I lived. I turned away from the house and began to walk. I walked 5 miles in the snow that night. The physical pain was excruciating. My bare feet bled on the icy asphalt, leaving small, frozen red footprints in the pristine white snow. The wind cut through my thin clothing, chilling me to the absolute marrow of my bones. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop, because every step I took away from that massive, fraudulent estate was a step toward my own survival. I thought they hated me simply because I wasn't perfect like Giselle. I thought I was a failure, a scapegoat, a disappointment who couldn't conform to the holy, wealthy image they desperately needed to project to the world. I thought my punishment was simply the result of my own inability to be the daughter they wanted. I didn't know that she was legally declaring me a runaway minor, so she could trigger the emergency guardianship clause of my late grandfather's trust fund. I didn't know that my agonizing, freezing walk through the snow was the foundational bedrock of their $50 million theft. I eventually ran from that gas station before the cashier could call child services. Even at 13, I knew that the foster care system in Atlanta was broken, and if I was placed in a group home, Reginald's immense wealth and political influence would ensure I was dragged back to that house and locked in a room until I turned 18. I couldn't allow them to control me. I had to disappear completely, but I didn't just survive. I studied. I taught myself advanced accounting principles from discarded college textbooks. I learned about offshore tax havens, shell companies, and the intricate mathematical architecture of corporate fraud. I developed a cold clinical obsession with numbers. Numbers didn't lie, numbers didn't manipulate you, numbers didn't stand on a porch in a silk robe and watch you freeze in the snow. Numbers were absolute truth. By the time I was 18, I had legally emancipated myself, secured a full academic scholarship to a top-tier university under my real name, and graduated with a dual degree in forensic accounting and corporate law in just 3 years. I didn't attend parties, I didn't date, I didn't socialize. I was a machine fueled by a deep, slow-burning furnace of cold fury. I was highly paid, deeply respected, and completely untouchable. I had built my own quiet empire, amassing my own substantial wealth, living in a penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline. I had survived the freezing snow and built a fortress of absolute security. And yet, despite my success, I never looked into my family's finances. I had maintained a strict, self-imposed rule. The Wilsons were dead to me. I didn't care about their megachurch, I didn't care about Reginald's real estate deals, or Corinne's televised prayer breakfasts. I was perfectly content to let them live their pathetic, fraudulent lives entirely separate from my reality. But then they made the fatal mistake of inviting me to the Maldives. They made the catastrophic error of thinking they could reach out from the past, drag me back into their toxic orbit, and steal from me one last time. They thought I was still the helpless 13-year-old girl they could easily manipulate and discard. They didn't realize they had just invited a corporate liquidator into their home, handed her the keys to their entire financial kingdom, and given her 7 hours to burn it all to the ground. I opened my eyes, the harsh fluorescent lights of the Atlanta airport medical room snapping me back to the present. The decryption software on my screen flashed a brilliant, satisfying green. Bypass complete, master ledger accessed. I looked at Attorney Harrison. He was watching me with a mix of awe and deep concern. The transfer is complete, I said, my voice cutting through the sterile silence of the room. I am in. I did not pause to celebrate the successful breach of their servers. I did not waste time gloating. As a corporate liquidator, I knew that the window of absolute vulnerability was excruciatingly narrow. I had exactly 14 minutes before their flight disembarked, which meant I had 14 minutes to navigate the labyrinth of their corrupt financial architecture, extract the fatal evidence, and secure it before they even realized their digital fortress had been compromised. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of practiced, methodical movement. The screen flashed as lines of code bypassed their basic pathetic passwords. My parents had clearly paid millions for what they believed was state-of-the-art cybersecurity, but to someone who routinely cracked the encrypted servers of international arms dealers and offshore tax havens, their security protocols were an absolute joke. They were relying on outdated firewalls and predictable dual authentication loops. They had built a digital gate with a paper lock. Within 90 seconds, I was entirely inside the private, highly restricted financial servers of the Atlanta elite megachurch. I possessed total administrative control. What are you looking for? Harrison asked, leaning closer, his eyes wide as he watched the cascading spreadsheets and classified bank statements flood the screen. Everything, I replied, my voice a low, focused hum. When you investigate a parasitic entity, you do not just cut off the head. You trace the roots, you find the host they are feeding on, and you rip the entire system out of the ground. I opened the master ledger and immediately started filtering the transactions by date. I bypassed the recent carefully sanitized public records and scrolled all the way back into the deep archives. I set the chronological filter for December 20th, 19 years ago. The exact day Corinne filed the false missing persons report. The exact day my life legally ended and their empire of theft began. The data loaded and the truth, stark and irrefutable, was finally laid bare before me. I traced the routing numbers. The money trail was complex, intentionally designed to confuse a standard IRS audit, but it was incredibly arrogant in its execution. For 18 years, they had strictly adhered to the legal parameters of the trust regarding the principal. They never touched the $50 million, because doing so would have triggered an immediate, mandatory federal review. They knew the law forbade them from liquidating the core asset. But the interest generated on $50 million sitting in a high-yield, aggressively managed investment account for nearly 2 decades was a staggering, astronomical sum. I watched the digital flow of money moving through a complex web of offshore shell companies located in the Cayman Islands and the British Virgin Islands. Millions of dollars in interest, money that legally belonged to me, had been systematically siphoned out every single financial quarter. It was a perfectly executed, relentless bleed. I clicked through the final layer of the offshore accounts, bypassing the dummy corporations, and gasped as the final destination loaded on my screen. The money hadn't just bought Giselle her fleet of luxury cars or Corinne her limited edition designer wardrobes. The scope of the theft was so much larger, so much more insidious than mere vanity purchases. It funded the church, I muttered, the horrifying reality settling heavily into my chest. Every single brick. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they had built a kingdom on my stolen identity. They played the role of the pious, wealthy elite, preaching to the masses about divine providence, while secretly, methodically bleeding my trust dry. But the horror did not stop there. The sheer audacity of Reginald's greed was matched only by his absolute legal recklessness. I opened a secondary, heavily guarded subfolder labeled Property Acquisitions. As my eyes scanned the documents, a cold, sharp laugh escaped my lips. Reginald hadn't just used the interest, he had weaponized my actual identity. He had used his temporary emergency guardianship, granted entirely by the fraudulent missing persons report, to secretly pledge the remaining $50 million principal of my trust fund as collateral. His entire life, his entire untouchable public image, was a fragile, highly illegal house of cards built entirely on my back. And then I found Preston's files. Preston, the arrogant, supposedly wealthy white brother-in-law currently sitting in first class, drinking champagne and mocking my fake misery. The man who paraded around the church acting as the chief financial advisor, bringing an air of old money legitimacy to the Wilson dynasty. The man who thought he was untouchable. I opened a heavily encrypted partition that Preston had likely set up himself, completely unaware that his encryption key was mathematically tied to his wife's predictable birthday. It took me less than 12 seconds to crack it. I downloaded the entire ledger of Preston's personal finances, and the illusion of his aristocratic superiority instantly shattered into a million pathetic pieces. "Look at this, Harrison," I said, pointing a finger at the screen, my voice dripping with absolute disgust. This is Preston's untouchable legacy, but the true devastating payload was buried in his personal expenditure reports. Preston wasn't just managing the stolen funds, he was actively stealing the stolen funds. I found a secondary, highly concealed routing number linked to a private post office box in Miami, Florida. I traced the outgoing wire transfers. He was siphoning church donations money stolen directly from my interest to fund an entirely secret double life. I pulled up the property deeds and credit card statements. He was leasing a massive $200,000 luxury beachfront condo in Boca Raton. And he definitely wasn't using it for quiet business retreats. He was wiring $10,000 on the first of every single month to a woman named Chloe. He was using my stolen money to fund his mistress, and it got worse. The bottom of the ledger revealed a massive, gaping financial wound. I stared at the outgoing wire transfers to offshore accounts located in Costa Rica and Antigua. $50,000 lost in October, $75,000 lost in November. Preston wasn't just a cheat, he was a degenerate, out-of-control gambler. He was currently $300,000 in debt to private, highly dangerous lenders in South Florida. He was frantically bleeding my trust fund dry just to keep his bookies from breaking his legs. He was a desperate, cornered animal hiding behind tailored suits and arrogant smirks. "He is bleeding them dry," I whispered, the poetic justice of the situation almost too perfect to comprehend. My sister married a man who is stealing the money she stole from me to cheat on her and pay off his gambling debts. I initiated a mass download. The progress bar on my screen filled up rapidly with a satisfying, brilliant green color. I was extracting every single bank statement, every offshore routing number, every fraudulent tax return Reginald ever filed, and every pathetic, desperate credit card statement Preston tried to hide. I was compiling a digital guillotine, and the blade was razor sharp. When the download completed, I pulled the encrypted flash drive from the port and slipped it deep into the pocket of my jacket. I closed the laptop with a sharp, decisive click and slid it back into my leather bag. The fear, the anxiety, the residual trauma of that freezing night 19 years ago were completely gone. The sadness was entirely replaced by a burning clinical focus. My family thought they had successfully trapped me overseas until midnight to claim the ultimate prize. They thought they had finally won. They had no idea they had just handed me the nuclear codes. I stood up from the metal examination table and slung the heavy leather strap of my laptop bag over my shoulder. I turned to Harrison. He was staring at me, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open, completely overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the crimes I had just unearthed in under 14 minutes. "The audit is complete," I said, my voice echoing with absolute terrifying finality. "My family is not just morally bankrupt, they are legally exposed, financially ruined, and completely vulnerable. Every cent they possess is a product of wire fraud, massive tax evasion, and felony identity theft." I walked toward the heavy door of the medical room. "Let us go to the arrival gate, Harrison. The first-class passengers always disembark first. I would absolutely hate to keep Preston and my loving parents waiting." Harrison rushed forward, grabbing my arm to stop me. His face was pale, his professional demeanor cracking under the immense pressure of the situation. "Vivian, stop and think about this logically," Harrison pleaded, his voice a frantic whisper. "You don't need to do this yourself. The federal marshals are already waiting in the security office just down the hall. I briefed them on the trust fund breach this morning." He gestured wildly toward the door. "Give them the flash drive, let me signal them to move in and arrest your family the second they step off the jet bridge. The evidence you just pulled is more than enough to put Reginald and Corinne in a federal penitentiary for the rest of their natural lives. Let law enforcement handle this quietly and cleanly in a private airport interrogation room. You don't need to face them, you don't need to cause a scene." I stopped, I looked down at his hand gripping my arm, and then I slowly looked up into his eyes. My expression was perfectly blank, a mask of absolute unyielding stone. I pulled my arm away from his grip, the movement slow and deliberate. A quiet arrest in a back room is a mercy they do not deserve, Harrison, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying, absolute whisper. My parents did not destroy my life quietly. They threw me out into a freezing blizzard and then spent 19 years publicly parading around Atlanta as the ultimate holy, untouchable family. They built a massive fraudulent empire on my stolen identity, and they demanded that the world bow down to them. I stepped closer to him, the cold fury radiating from my body like a physical force. They need to watch that empire crumble. They need to see it burn in front of the very people they lied to. I want them to feel the exact moment their power vanishes. I want them to look into my eyes when the handcuffs click shut. I turned away from the lawyer and pushed the heavy medical room door open, stepping out into the bright, sterile corridor of the Atlanta airport. I am going to Terminal E, I said, not looking back. And I am going to tear them apart. Harrison had no choice but to follow me as I marched out of the medical center and navigated through the bright, sterile corridors of the Atlanta airport, heading straight for Terminal E. The terminal was a sprawling, cavernous space, bustling with thousands of exhausted travelers dragging suitcases, crying children, and expectant families holding up colorful welcome signs. The ambient noise was a chaotic hum of multiple languages, rolling wheels, and automated overhead announcements. But to me, the terminal was perfectly silent. I was operating in a state of hyper-focused clarity, moving through the crowd like a shark navigating a crowded reef. The taller marshal, a man with sharp eyes and a severely clipped haircut, nodded at me. Miss Wilson, we received Attorney Harrison's briefing. We have 2 units positioned at the primary customs checkpoint. We are ready to intercept your parents the second they clear the passport desks and pull them into the secondary holding rooms for questioning regarding the wire fraud allegations. I stopped walking. I looked at the marshal, my expression unreadable. Stand down, I said softly, but with absolute authority. The marshal blinked, clearly taken aback. He glanced at Harrison, seeking confirmation. Harrison simply sighed and rubbed his temples, signaling that I was currently dictating the terms of engagement. I do not want them arrested at the customs checkpoint, I explained, my voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. A private arrest allows them to maintain their dignity. It allows them to immediately call their high-priced crisis management teams and begin spinning the narrative before the public even knows they are in custody. I will not give them that advantage. I pointed toward the massive frosted glass doors of the VIP arrival gate, where the first-class passengers would inevitably emerge into the main terminal to collect their oversized luggage. I want them to walk through those doors, I instructed the marshals. I want them to step out into the public terminal, surrounded by hundreds of ordinary people. I want them to feel absolutely safe. I want them to believe with every fiber of their corrupt beings that their malicious plan has worked perfectly. I want them to think they have won. The shorter marshal narrowed his eyes. And what exactly is your play here? Ma'am, we have warrants to execute. The marshals looked at me, a flicker of genuine respect crossing their stoic faces. They recognized a predator when they saw one. The taller marshal gave a single crisp nod. We will wait for your signal, Miss Wilson. They melted seamlessly back into the crowded terminal, becoming completely invisible among the throngs of waiting families. Harrison stood next to me, visibly sweating, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched his leather briefcase. I stared up at the giant digital arrival board suspended from the vaulted ceiling. The bright blue letters illuminated the space above us. The flight connecting from Dubai, carrying the first-class passengers from the Maldives, was listed on the 3rd row. The status currently glowed in bright yellow letters, indicating it was slightly delayed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a steady rhythmic drumbeat of anticipation. It was the physical manifestation of my adrenaline pushing against my clinical restraint. The aggressive air conditioning in the terminal felt exactly like the freezing wind from that December night. 19 years ago, the chill seeped into my bones, a visceral reminder of exactly why I was standing here. But this time, I was not a helpless, terrified child freezing on a porch, begging for a mother who didn't care. I was a weapon forged in that exact cold, and I was about to detonate. I watched the digital board with unblinking intensity. The yellow delayed status flickered, held for an agonizing second, and vanished. The screen refreshed, and bright, vibrant green letters appeared next to the flight number. Landed, the word sent a massive shockwave of pure electricity straight to my core. The waiting was over, the trap was armed. Reginald, Corinne, Giselle, and Preston were currently walking through the jet bridge, strutting past the economy passengers, completely unaware that the daughter they had tried to erase was standing just a few hundred feet away, holding the absolute destruction of their entire lives. "They are coming through," Harrison whispered, nervously, checking his expensive watch. "The VIP customs channel clears in minutes." I didn't respond, I simply stepped slightly deeper into the shadow of the concrete pillar, my eyes glued to the frosted glass doors. 3 minutes later, the doors slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. My father, Bishop Reginald Wilson, led the pack. He walked with the heavy, arrogant stride of a man who believed he owned the very ground he stepped on. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit that looked pristine despite a 20-hour flight, his heavy gold watch flashing under the airport lights. His booming pastoral laugh echoed across the polished terminal floor as he gestured expansively to a fawning airline attendant. Next to him, my mother Corinne strutted like runway royalty. She was draped in a pristine white cashmere coat, clutching a limited-edition crocodile skin Birkin bag that screamed of aggressive, unearned wealth. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked exactly like the pious, wealthy matriarch she pretended to be on television. Right behind them, my sister Giselle walked arm in arm with her husband Preston. Giselle was wearing oversized dark Chanel sunglasses indoors, an absurd display of entitlement, and was actively loudly complaining to Preston about the quality of the caviar service in the first-class cabin. "I swear the beluga was practically mushy," Giselle whined, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "I should have told the flight attendant to send it back. It is absolutely unacceptable when we pay that much for a ticket." Preston threw his head back and laughed loudly, a sharp braying sound that carried easily over the ambient noise of the terminal. He adjusted the lapels of his suit and smirked. "It is still significantly better than whatever tap water Vivian is drinking on that public beach right now." Preston chuckled, his voice loud enough for several passing travelers to turn their heads. "Do you think she figured out her passport is missing yet?" Giselle giggled, adjusting the massive diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. "Who cares?" Corinne chimed in, not even bothering to lower her voice. She waved a dismissive, perfectly manicured hand in the air. "Let her rot in the sand. By the time she finds an American consulate to issue an emergency replacement, we will be sitting in the bank counting the 50 million. God is so incredibly good to us." Reginald turned around and beamed at his family, a look of pure, sociopathic pride on his face. "The Lord always rewards the righteous, Preston. That money was meant to build our sanctuary and expand our holy footprint. Leaving Vivian behind was simply divine intervention. She was always a burden now. We are officially in the clear." They were so entirely wrapped up in their arrogant celebration, so blinded by their own greed and perceived victory, that they didn't even look up as they approached my location. They were walking straight toward the VIP baggage carousel, laughing and joking about my supposed demise. Completely relaxed, I took a slow, deep breath, pulling the freezing terminal air into my lungs. I let the burning clinical focus take over every single nerve ending in my body. I stepped out from the deep shadow of the massive concrete pillar and planted my feet directly in the center of their path. I stood perfectly still, my posture straight, my hands relaxed at my sides. They were less than 10 feet away when Reginald finally looked up. "Welcome back to Atlanta," I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any emotion, but it cut through their laughter like a razor blade slicing through silk. The physical shock that hit my family was something I will savor for the rest of my natural life. It was a spectacular, simultaneous collapse of their arrogant posture playing out in agonizingly slow motion. Giselle literally stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the polished tile. She grabbed Preston's arm to steady herself, her jaw dropping so fast she looked utterly comical. The smug, superior smile on Preston's face vanished instantly, entirely replaced by a sickly, pale shade of absolute panic. He stared at me as if a corpse had just crawled out of a grave and materialized on the airport floor. Reginald was the only one who didn't immediately step back. The sheer shock on his face lasted for exactly 3 seconds before his deep ingrained narcissism violently reasserted itself. His eyes darted frantically around the busy terminal, quickly assessing the crowd of onlookers, before snapping back to me, his face rapidly contorted into a mask of aggressive, seething irritation. He immediately reverted to the exact same manipulation tactics he had used when I was a helpless 13-year-old child. He puffed out his massive chest, attempting to use his physical size and booming voice to intimidate me back into submission. "How the hell did you get here?" Reginald demanded, his voice a harsh, aggressive whisper, furious that his perfect plan had been interrupted. He took a threatening step forward, trying to invade my personal space and force me to back down. Corinne assured me that your documents were secured in her luggage. How did you get on a plane, Vivian? I didn't flinch, I didn't step back, I looked right past his expensive suit and saw the pathetic, terrified thief hiding underneath. I always travel with a secondary diplomatic-level corporate passport for my forensic auditing firm. I replied smoothly, my voice carrying clearly to the surrounding travelers. A habit I picked up because I learned very early in life that relying on my family is a fast track to ruin. Reginald scoffed, waving a heavy dismissive hand in the air as if my presence and my explanation were nothing more than a minor irritating delay in his schedule. He refused to acknowledge the reality that I had outsmarted them. He still believed he was in absolute control. He pointed a thick finger at the massive pile of luxury luggage sitting on the VIP baggage carousel behind me. I do not care how you got here, Vivian, he snapped, his voice tight with barely suppressed rage. Since you decided to stalk us at the airport, you can at least make yourself useful. Grab the heavy trunks, your mother is exhausted from the flight. Bring them to the limousine waiting outside. And do not make a scene. We have a massive charity gala to prepare for tonight, and I will not let your usual dramatic, attention-seeking behavior ruin our evening. It was a classic Reginald tactic: when confronted, demean the victim, treat them like a servant in public to aggressively reassert dominance. Reduce them to the frightened, obedient child who used to beg for his approval. He fully expected me to lower my eyes, grab the handles of his heavy Louis Vuitton trunks, and shrink back into the role of the worthless scapegoat. I stood my ground, I looked at the mountain of designer luggage, and then I stared directly, unflinchingly, into my father's eyes. I carried my own bags when you threw me into the snow in the middle of the night, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the terminal, drawing the attention of several nearby travelers. I dragged my own belongings down an icy driveway while you stood on a warm porch and told me I was garbage. I certainly will not be carrying yours. Reginald stiffened, the thick veins in his neck began to bulge against his silk collar. Do not speak to your father that way, you ungrateful brat. Corinne hissed, stepping forward to join the attack. The heavy scent of her expensive perfume could not mask the stench of her panic. You always do this, you always try to ruin our happiness. We gave you everything, and you threw it away. You are an absolute embarrassment to this family and to our church. You gave me nothing, Corinne, I fired back, stepping closer to her, forcing her to look at me. You filed a false missing persons report the morning after you kicked me out. You legally declared me a runaway so you could hijack the emergency guardianship clause of grandfather's trust. Every designer coat you are wearing, every diamond on Giselle's neck, every first-class ticket you bought for this flight was paid for with the interest stolen directly from my account. The air between us turned electric. Travelers walking past began to slow down, stopping entirely, turning their heads to watch the well-dressed, wealthy family arguing intensely in the middle of the terminal. The realization that I knew exactly how they had funded their empire hit Reginald hard. His hands balled into tight fists, the holy pastor facade was cracking rapidly under the harsh fluorescent airport lights. Corinne realized that Reginald was losing control of the situation. She stepped in front of him, her perfectly manicured fingernails pointing right at my face, ready to unleash a hysterical, highly practiced performance for the gathering crowd. Corinne threw her hands up into the air and let out a piercing theatrical shriek that echoed off the high-vaulted ceilings of Terminal E. She staggered backward, pressing the back of her hand against her forehead like a swooning actress in a cheap soap opera. Help us, please, somebody help us. She wailed, her voice carrying over the noise of the busy baggage claim. She pointed a trembling finger right at my chest, her diamond rings catching the light. This woman is insane, she is stalking us. My estranged daughter has lost her mind and she is harassing our family. She looked around frantically at the growing crowd of travelers, who had stopped pulling their luggage to stare at the wealthy family, having a meltdown. She locked eyes with two airport security guards who were rushing over, their hands hovering near their radios. Please, officers, you have to arrest her. Corinne cried, fake glistening tears to well up in her eyes. She is deeply mentally unstable, she ran away from home years ago and now she follows us everywhere demanding money. We do not feel safe, we just got off a 20-hour flight, and she is threatening my husband and my children. You need to remove her immediately. The two security guards pushed their way through the circle of onlookers, looking tense and serious. They stepped between me and my parents, holding their hands out to create a physical barrier. "Ma'am, you need to step back and lower your voice," one of the guards said, looking at me with a stern expression. "If you are harassing these passengers, we are going to have to detain you and call the local police." Reginald stood behind the guards, looking incredibly smug. He adjusted the lapels of his custom charcoal suit and gave me a look of pure triumphant superiority. He thought his wife had successfully flipped the script. He thought they had won again, using the authorities to silence me, just like they did 19 years ago. I didn't step back, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't act like the hysterical, crazy woman Corinne was desperately trying to portray me as. I simply reached into my leather laptop bag. I moved slowly and deliberately, making sure the guards could see exactly what I was doing. My fingers bypassed the encrypted flash drive and closed around a thick folded piece of heavy stock paper. I pulled it out and held it up under the bright lights. "What is that?" the security guard asked, his hand dropping away from his radio. I unfolded the paper and flattened it out so the official state seals and the notarized stamps were clearly visible to everyone. "This is a certified copy of a missing persons report filed 19 years ago in Fulton County," I said, my voice dangerously calm and incredibly steady. "It was filed by that woman crying fake tears behind you. Corinne Wilson, the wife of the esteemed Bishop Reginald Wilson. I want everyone here to listen very closely to the lies she told the police to steal my identity." I cleared my throat and began reading the exact words Corinne had written on that cold December morning. "My daughter, Vivian, ran away in the middle of the night. She took cash from my purse and packed a bag. She has a long history of violent, unpredictable outbursts and severe mental instability. We fear for her safety and the safety of others. She has completely severed ties with our loving family and refuses to submit to our parental guidance." I looked up from the paper and stared directly into Corinne's wide, terrified eyes. "She filed this report 12 hours after my father dragged me by the collar of my pajamas and threw me into a blizzard, locking the doors behind me." The crowd of onlookers gasped, murmuring among themselves as the horrific reality of my words settled over the terminal. The security guards looked at each other, suddenly unsure of how to handle a family dispute involving decades-old police reports and public allegations of massive fraud. Corinne's face drained of all color, her fake tears stopped instantly, entirely replaced by a stark white mask of absolute panic. She opened her mouth to speak but no words came out. She looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. Reginald grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to leave bruises, trying to pull her behind him. That is a fake," Corinne finally stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "She is lying, that paper is a forgery, we loved her, she is just a pathological liar making up stories to extort us because we are wealthy and successful." She couldn't even maintain eye contact with the security guards as she stumbled through her pathetic denial. She was crumbling under the weight of her own documented lies. That was when Giselle decided to step in. She pushed past Preston and stomped right up to the security guards, her face twisted into an ugly snarl of pure unchecked entitlement. "You are nothing but a jealous loser, Vivian," Giselle screamed, pointing her designer handbag at my face. "You have always been obsessed with us. You are just mad because Daddy built an empire and you got left behind in the dirt. Look at you. You are pathetic, standing in an airport reading ancient pieces of paper trying to ruin our lives because you have nothing of your own." She tossed her hair over her shoulder and glared at me with pure venom. "We are rich, we are powerful, we do important work for the community, and you are just a bitter little nobody trying to get a payout. You want our money so badly it is making you crazy." Preston stood right behind her, nodding along with her furious rant, trying to look tough while hiding behind his wife's aggressive outburst. He puffed out his chest, aggressively adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. He looked down at me with the kind of practiced, arrogant authority that only a privileged man who thought he owned the world could muster. "Listen to me very carefully, Vivian," Preston said, his voice dropping into a low, threatening register meant to intimidate me into silence. "I do not know what kind of mental breakdown you are experiencing right now, but you are playing a very dangerous game. You are harassing my family in a public airport and throwing around baseless accusations like a lunatic." He placed a firm, protective hand on Giselle's shoulder and glared at me with absolute contempt. "My family has some of the most aggressive corporate lawyers in the country on retainer. If you do not turn around and walk away right this second, I will personally make sure you are sued for defamation, harassment, and extortion. We will bury you in so much legal debt you will never recover. You will spend the rest of your pathetic life paying for this little stunt." I didn't shrink back, I didn't drop my gaze, instead, a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey step directly onto a landmine. I reached back into my leather laptop bag and my fingers closed around a thick manila folder. "Is that so, Preston?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly calm and level. "You are going to use your massive family wealth to destroy me." "That is fascinating, because according to the financial records I just pulled from your personal encrypted servers, your family wealth does not actually exist." Preston's face twitched violently, the smug confidence in his eyes faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly masked it with a sneer. "You are insane," he muttered, trying to dismiss me while nervously avoiding eye contact with the gathering crowd. I pulled the manila folder out and flipped it open. I held up a thick stack of bank statements printed on crisp white paper. "I decided to do a little forensic digging into the untouchable Preston legacy," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the ambient noise of the airport terminal. "It turns out your grandfather filed for bankruptcy 12 years ago. Your precious trust fund evaporated before you even graduated college. You are completely broke, Preston. You have been broke since the day you met my sister. You married Giselle because you desperately needed access to the Wilson Church money to keep up the illusion of your elite lifestyle." Giselle stopped glaring at me and slowly turned to look at her husband. "Preston, what is she talking about?" Giselle asked, her voice tight with confusion and the very first hints of genuine panic. "Do not listen to her, Giselle," he snapped, his face turning a blotchy shade of bright red. "She is fabricating documents to cause drama and distract from her own pathetic life." I pulled out another stack of papers from the folder. "These are your personal credit card statements, Preston," I announced loudly, making sure every single person in the crowd could hear me. "The ones you keep routed to a private post office box in Miami so your loving wife never sees them. Should we talk about how you have been spending the church donations you siphon from my stolen interest?" I looked down at the highlighted lines on the statement. "Let us start with the luxury beachfront condo in Boca Raton, Florida. $200,000 in maintenance and furnishing fees paid over the last 18 months. And you are definitely not using it for business trips." Preston's mouth opened but no words came out. He took a hesitant, terrified step backward, his defensive posture completely collapsing. The red blotches on his face spread rapidly down his neck as the blood drained from his cheeks. "Who lives in the Boca condo, Preston?" I pressed, taking a step toward him, relentless and unforgiving. "Is it the woman named Chloe who receives a $10,000 wire transfer from your private account on the first of every single month?" Giselle let out a sharp, strangled gasp. "Or maybe the money is for the massive gambling debts you have been racking up at the offshore sportsbooks." I continued, flipping to the next page and reading the numbers aloud. $50,000 lost in October, $75,000 lost in November. You are currently $300,000 in debt to private, highly dangerous lenders in South Florida. You are bleeding my stolen trust fund dry just to keep your bookies from breaking your legs." The crowd of onlookers in the airport terminal gasped in collective, horrified shock. The security guards who had been ready to detain me just moments ago were now standing completely still, watching the wealthy facade of this family disintegrate in real time. Reginald and Corinne stared at Preston in absolute horror. Their perfect corporate son-in-law, the man they used to legitimize their empire, was being exposed as a broke, cheating, degenerate fraud right in front of their eyes. Giselle ripped her shoulder away from Preston's hand as if his touch physically burned her skin. She stared at him with wide, horrified eyes. Her designer sunglasses slipped from her fingers and crashed onto the polished floor, shattering the lenses. "Preston, tell me she is lying," Giselle demanded, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "Tell me you do not have a condo in Florida with another woman. Tell me you are not gambling away our money." Preston looked like a cornered animal desperately searching for an escape route that simply didn't exist. He stammered, completely unable to form a coherent sentence. "Giselle, baby, it is not what it looks like," he pleaded, raising his hands defensively. "I can explain everything. It is just an investment property. The money was for a business venture that went south. She is twisting the facts to tear us apart." I am reading your exact bank routing numbers, I stated flatly, holding the papers out toward Giselle. He has been funding a secret double life for years while you paraded him around Atlanta as the perfect, loyal husband. He is a parasite who attached himself to your stolen wealth, and now he is draining it faster than you can steal it from me. The villainous alliance that had stood so strong just moments ago was instantly, violently fractured. Giselle was no longer looking at me with hatred. All of her venom, all of her furious entitlement, was now directed entirely at her husband. She shoved Preston hard in the chest, her manicured nails digging into the expensive fabric of his suit. "You broke loser," she screamed, her voice echoing through the entire baggage claim area. "You told me your family was untouchable. You told me you were managing our investments. You have been stealing from me to fund your pathetic side pieces in Florida." Preston stumbled backward, raising his arms to shield his face from his furious wife. "Giselle, please calm down," he begged, looking around nervously at the dozens of people recording them on their cell phones. "We cannot do this here, everyone is watching us. I want them to watch," Giselle shrieked, losing all sense of her carefully cultivated church elegance. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You made a complete fool out of me." Reginald stepped between them, his face thunderous and dark with rage. He grabbed Giselle's arm and shoved Preston away with surprising force. "Enough," he roared, desperately trying to salvage some shred of his pastoral authority. "We will handle this at home. We will not air our dirty laundry in a public terminal like common trash." But the damage was already done. The pristine unified front of the Wilson family was completely shattered beyond repair. Preston stood off to the side, shrinking away from the furious glares of his wife and in-laws. He looked completely defeated, his unearned arrogance entirely stripped away. The illusion of his superiority was dead. I watched the chaos unfold with a profound, icy sense of satisfaction. I hadn't even dropped the heaviest hammer yet, and the first massive crack in their foundation had already split them wide open. Reginald watched his golden son-in-law crumble into a pathetic, stammering mess, and the reality of the situation finally pierced through his thick armor of narcissism. He was losing absolute control of the narrative. The thick veins in his neck pulsed with barely contained fury. He turned his deep, dark glare back to me, his massive chest heaving as he realized the true magnitude of what I was holding in my hands. I was no longer the helpless runaway he could discard at will or manipulate with harsh words. I was holding the absolute destruction of his entire megachurch empire and his pristine public image. He took a heavy, aggressive step toward me, his large frame casting a long dark shadow over the polished airport tile. He thought he could still intimidate me with sheer physical dominance, just like he did when I was a terrified 13-year-old girl shivering in the snow. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little witch," Reginald hissed through clenched teeth, his voice trembling with a rage so deep it bordered on madness. "I do not care what fake papers you printed off the internet or what lies you are trying to spin. You are coming with me right now, and we are going to fix this mess before you ruin everything I have built for this family." Before his fingers could even graze the fabric of my jacket, two tall men in dark, inconspicuous suits materialized from the crowd. They moved with a sudden, terrifying fluid precision that instantly shifted the entire atmosphere in the room. The taller marshal stepped directly between me and my father, raising a firm hand and pressing it hard against Reginald's chest, halting his momentum instantly. The second marshal flanked him smoothly, unbuttoning his suit jacket just enough to reveal the heavy black firearm holstered at his hip, and the gleaming silver badge clipped to his leather belt. "Federal Marshal, sir," the taller man stated, his voice radiating absolute undeniable authority. "I suggest you take a very large step back from Miss Wilson, unless you want to spend the rest of your evening in federal custody facing assault charges on top of the federal warrants we are already executing." The physical transformation of Reginald was a magnificent, unparalleled masterpiece to behold. The aggressive, untouchable bishop vanished in a fraction of a second. His heavy shoulders slumped, and the warm color drained rapidly from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified, broken old man. He stumbled backward, his hands shooting up in the air as if he had just touched a burning hot stove. Corinne let out a stifled, high-pitched gasp and covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes darting frantically between the federal agents and her husband. Giselle stood completely frozen, her intense anger at Preston entirely forgotten as the crushing, suffocating reality of federal law enforcement crashed down upon them. They had spent nearly 2 decades stealing millions, playing God in their massive megachurch, and feeling entirely invincible. Now the very real, terrifying threat, federal prison, was staring them right in the face. Preston tried to slowly back away into the crowd, attempting to slip away unnoticed, but one of the marshals shot him a cold, warning glare that nailed his expensive loafers to the floor. The entire villainous alliance was utterly paralyzed. I stepped out from behind the marshals and walked slowly, deliberately toward my father. I watched the heavy beads of sweat form on his forehead and trickle down the side of his face. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wide with a panicked, animalistic fear. I looked at the glittering Rolex on his wrist and the custom-tailored lapels of his suit. It was all bought with my blood and my stolen future. I smiled at him, a cold, calculating smile that promised absolute, unmitigated ruin. "You have a choice to make, Reginald," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm, so the gathering crowd had to strain to hear me. "You have spent your entire life controlling every narrative and orchestrating every scam to protect your brand. Now I am the one holding the script. These federal marshals have a warrant for your arrest based on 18 years of wire fraud, tax evasion, and identity theft." I gestured to the surrounding crowd. Hundreds of people were holding up their cell phones, recording every single second of the confrontation. "They have the authorization to put you and Corinne in handcuffs right here in Terminal E. They will read you your rights while the airport patrons film you and call the paparazzi. Tomorrow morning, the video of the great Bishop Reginald being dragged out of an airport in chains will be the top story on every news network in the country." Reginald swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked at the phones recording him. The illusion was gone, the empire was dead. I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "You can turn around, put your hands behind your back, and walk quietly to the security office with these gentlemen. You will still lose everything. Your accounts are already frozen. Your church properties are being seized by the IRS as we speak. You are a bankrupt, broken fraud, but if you walk away quietly, you might spare yourself the final, ultimate public humiliation." Reginald looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of absolute hatred and profound, shattering defeat. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer one last defense, one last pastoral manipulation, but no words came out. He simply lowered his head, the fight completely drained from his massive frame. He slowly turned around and placed his hands behind his back. The taller marshal stepped forward, the sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoing loudly in the suddenly quiet terminal. The sound was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. Corinne immediately burst into genuine hysterical tears, dropping to her knees on the polished floor, begging the marshals for mercy she never extended to me. Giselle simply stared blankly at the wall, her entire reality fractured, while Preston stood trembling, waiting for his turn in the cuffs. I didn't wait to watch them be led away. I didn't need to see them loaded into the back of a federal transport vehicle. The victory wasn't in their physical arrest, it was in the absolute destruction of their power. I turned my back on them, I adjusted the strap of my leather laptop bag, looked at Attorney Harrison, and gave him a single approving nod. Then I began to walk away. I walked past the gaping onlookers, past the flashing cell phone cameras, and straight toward the airport exit doors. I didn't look back, not once. I didn't need to see the ashes of the empire I had just burned to the ground. My silence for the past 18 years wasn't a sign of weakness. It wasn't a symptom of a broken, defeated scapegoat. It was a perfectly executed trap. I had let them believe they were invincible right up until the exact moment I pulled the floor out from under them. Let this be a lesson to anyone watching who feels undervalued, marginalized, or abused by the people who are supposed to protect them. Never let them see you sweat. Never let them see you cry. If they mistake your silence for weakness, let them. Let them build their arrogant castles on sand, and when the time is right, use your own success, your own brilliant expertise to summon the tide and wash them all away. You don't need their approval, you don't need their apologies, you just need to walk away, build your own empire, and never ever look back. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder of their own true power. Until next time, stay strong, stay focused, and never let anyone dim your light.